In this lesson, we're going to learn how to make a pre-composition. Okay, so earlier in this course, we learned how to make a composition. We can do it by hitting the New Composition button down here at the bottom of our project panel, or dragging a piece of footage into it, or just going through the composition menu here at the top. Another way you can create a composition is by selecting layers that are already in your composition here on the timeline. And then you create what's called a pre-composition. And what happens is those layers are basically combined into one layer that contains them on the inside. So it's like you're nesting them together. So let's go ahead and create one of these for our robot, because you'll notice we've got this piece for our robot, that's the gun, this piece that is our beauty pass, and then this piece for our shadow. That's a lot of things to keep track of in our main composition. So we can pre-compose those three layers into one layer that we can just call robot. So to do it, you want to shift select the layers that you want to compile into that pre-composite. And then I like to use the keyboard shortcut Control, holding Control, Shift, holding Shift, and then hit C, and it will pop up the pre-compose dialog here. So it's going to ask you for the new composition name, which we just talked about. We'll call this robot. And in our case right now, we only have the option to move all attributes into the new composition. So we'll go ahead and say OK. And you'll notice what happened, that now instead of 3 layers on our timeline, we have 1 layer. And so now if I want to move my robot around, I can simply select that one comp, and it's going to move all 3 pieces, his shadow, his body, and the gun all at the same time. And I'll just hit Control Z to move him back into place. Now, what if I want to get to those individual layers? I can simply double click on that robot comp. So double click. And now you'll see it opened that comp up as another composition here in the timeline, and I've got all 3 of my passes. Now right now it doesn't really look like I've got my shadow pass because our background is defaulting to black. So there's one thing you can do to counteract this. If you have a transparent background, you don't have anything behind him, you can come down here to this little switch at the bottom of the composition panel, and it says Toggle Transparency Grid. And if you just click that, you'll get that telltale Adobe checkerboard background that you recognize for transparency. And I'm just middle clicking to pan him around, and you can see his shadow is very visible there on the ground beneath him. It just was being not visible by having that black background. So I actually like to work with this transparent background on layers like this. It helps to be able to know, okay, I'm working with a background that's transparent. I don't have to worry about that blocking out something that I want to be transparent in my main composition, which I can quickly go back to by selecting the main robot composition right there. And this is where my 2 composited layers come together, one being a composition and one being a sequence of frames. Now, one other thing that happened when we created that pre-comp was that it was added up here in our project panel. So now we can access that composition almost as if it was a piece of footage at any time. So if we wanted to have another robot, we could simply grab that from the project panel and drop it on. Then we would have two robots, which I don't really want that. So I'll select it and delete it. But just know that you can grab any composition that you create from this panel and then put them inside of other compositions. Now this pre-comp for the robot, we could nest even further. If I wanted to just pre-comp one of these layers and put them inside of a pre-composition, I could do that. So let's try it out with something like our ground shadow. Now you don't have to do this. I don't really have, a specific reason. This is just for demonstration purposes. But if I select, let's say, the ground shadow, and I hit Control Shift C, then that's going to pop up my pre-compose menu again. Now this time I have a little bit of a different choice. Because I'm only pre-comping one layer, I have the option to leave all attributes in Robot, or to choose what we chose last time, to move all attributes into the new composition. So here is what mostly changes with those two choices, and sometimes it's going to be very important to make this choice, and sometimes it won't matter as much. If you're only pre-composing one layer, and let's say that that layer has an effect and some keyframes on it, like our gun heat, for example. If I pre-compose that layer, I have the choice to leave all the attributes in the robot comp, or to move all attributes into the new composition. So right now we're in the robot composition, and attributes are things like keyframes and effects. So what will happen is the effect will remain applied to the composition here in the robot composition. Now this one doesn't really have any effects, so let's actually cancel that. And I'm going to show this to you with the gun heat so you really can see what's happening. So for example, we have our effects right here, and you can tell that we have some keyframes inside of that transform menu. So if I select this gun heat and we try to pre-comp that, I'll hit Control-Shift-C. It's going to pop that open. Again, we've got our leave attributes and our move attributes. So let's say I want this layer to be pre-composed, but I want to leave the keyframes here. I'll leave that, leave all attributes checked, and hit OK. And now if I open that back up, you see I still have my effects and I still have my keyframes. But if I double click this, I can go in and have the unaltered, no keyframes, no effects on the layer. Could be because you can know that because you can see that this is visible whenever we had set those keyframes on that heat pass to make it invisible at the beginning. So this is kind of the unaltered version of that. Then if we go back into the robot comp, we have the version that has the keyframes and the effects. Now, I'm going to undo this, so I'll hit Control-Z. So now we don't have that pre-composed anymore. It's just the layer with its keyframes and effect. And we'll hit Control-Shift-C with it selected again. And this time I'm going to choose Move All Attributes into the new composition. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Now, if I toggle this down, you'll see we don't see the keyframes and we don't see the effects. That's because they have been placed inside of the gun heat composition on that layer. So now I basically have this layer free to do with what I want. I don't have any effects on it or any kind of keyframe. So if I double click though, I can come inside of this layer and start to see those effects and keyframes have been applied. Now, this is necessary to know because sometimes you are going to want to leave the keyframes on the outside so that you can do something else on the inside of the comp. Maybe you want to add a different effect that needs to happen beforehand, like some effects don't really work very well with other effects. For instance, adding motion blur on the same layer as a effect like glow. So if I added a post effect of motion blur with that glow turned on, they don't really play very well together because that's already kind of blurring it a little bit and starts to look strange. But I can do what I've done here and pre-compose it so that the glow is happening first and the motion blur could happen later. I could put it on this layer right here. So there's lots of different things to keep in mind when we're talking about pre-comps, but it is a workflow that is essential to everybody that's going to work in After Effects. And we're going to start using them a lot more throughout this course. For now though, we've just kind of barely dipped our toe into the pool of pre-compositions, mostly just by pre-comping our robot. So we've got our 3 robot layers here, and then we created another pre-composition inside of the robot pre-comp for the gun heat, and we went over what the difference between leaving your attributes in that original composition or moving them into the new pre-composition what those differences are. So in our next lesson, we are going to step away from the timeline and the compositions for a moment, and we're going to talk about the project panel again. And you'll notice that it is starting to get pretty busy over here. We've got a lot of different things going on, and it might be hard to keep track of them. So there's a really easy way to organize it that's just right here inside of After Effects that is a good habit for any compositor or really anybody using After Effects to get into. So we'll talk about how to organize that and work more efficiently in the next lesson.